So, fact file on Bernard of Clairvaux, a man on a mission. Name, Bernard Sorel, aka Bernard of Clairvaux, nationality French, dates 1090 to 1153, appearance tall, gaunt with a bad back. Before he was famous, a monk, famous for preaching, heretic hunting and founding monasteries. Why does he matter? He shows what happens when zeal gets turned up to 11. Could you have a drink with him down the pub? No, just no. You do not love. Few men have been more driven in their life than Bernard Sorel, better known as Bernard of Clairvaux, after the monastery he had founded, aged just 25. He was tall, gaunt, austere, in near permanent pain from the severe lifestyle he had adopted. Burning with righteous zeal and dismissive of those who thought differently, Bernard was the most influential churchman of his generation, far more so than any of the popes or anti-popes of the time. He had massive reserves of energy. He was perpetually on the move, cajoling, arguing, bullying people into following his line. A compulsive letter writer, he had a finger in virtually every religious controversy of the time. He had to travel so much because heresy was everywhere. When he went to hunt down the followers of Henry of Lausanne, he found an entire region full of heresy. Towns like Bergerac, Périgueux, Sarlat, Cahors and Toulouse. At Bernard's approach, Henry departed Toulouse, but he left behind many adherents, especially among the ordinary people. Bernard called heretics the little foxes that spoil the vines. He loathed the idea of these little people, these nobodies, daring to attack the rooted historical church. And they were everywhere. Hidden, of course, secret. They didn't wear "I love Peter de Bruys" t-shirts. They talked and discussed and thought their own thoughts. And the church was pushed to ever more extreme acts of fox hunting. Henry was still actively preaching in 1145, by the way, but when he was caught, he ended up in jail for the rest of his life. Famous people could be heretics as well. Bernard loathed Abelard, and in 1140 managed to get Abelard condemned at Rome as a heretic, an act that inspired Peter the Venerable, Abbot of Cluny, to write to Bernard with these quietly devastating words: "You perform all the difficult religious duties. You fast, you watch, you suffer, but you will not endure the easy ones. You do not love." He was wrong, though. Bernard was in love. He was in love with the church, and he loved it with the pure, blind, chilling passion of the fanatic. In later times, he would have been a fantastic KGB officer. He was incorruptible and unimpeachable. He was pure, adamantine, flint-like. He walked the talk, certainly, but it was a walk across coals of fire. Bernard had the true restless hatred of a fanatic. When there was a conflict between the Innocent and Anacletus, two rival popes, Bernard campaigned ceaselessly for Innocent. Anacletus was from Cluny, a monastery Bernard loathed on account of its worldliness and greed. Worse, he had Jewish forebears. Bernard wrote that "it is to the injury of Christ that the offspring of a Jew should have seized for himself the throne of St. Peter." Quite how Christ, himself a Jew, should have been injured by this he never made quite clear. Bernard founded new communities throughout Europe, including several in England, Wales and Ireland. By the time of his death, in 1153, Clairvaux proper had grown to a community of some 700 monks. His interference in church politics brought him the support of several popes. Not that he was always supportive of them. When Eugenius III was elected, Bernard wrote to those who had made the choice, "May God forgive you for what you have done. What reason or counsel, when the Supreme Pontiff was dead, made you rush upon a mere rustic, lay hands on him in his refuge, wrest from his hands the axe, pick or hoe, and lift him to a throne?" To Eugenius he wrote, "Thus does the finger of God raise up the poor out of the dust, and lift up the beggar from the dunghill, that he may sit with princes and inherit the throne of glory." And what is remarkable about this is that Eugenius was one of his friends. He was a former monk of Clairvaux and one of Bernard's disciples. As Pope, though, Eugenius faced a problem. Several Christian states had been established as kinds of spin-offs from the First Crusade. One of these was the Christian county of Edessa, established by Baldwin of Bologna in 1098. It was the most easterly and therefore the most vulnerable of the Crusader states. And on Christmas Eve, 1144, it was conquered by an Arab army under the brilliantly named Imad ad-Din Zengi, Atabeg of Mosul. Try saying that 3 times really fast. The news was a stunning surprise back in the West. but people believed that Crusader states would be permanent. Eugenius, who was a mild-mannered, quiet man, asked Louis VII of France to put together a task force. Whatever his faults, Eugenius was a man of integrity. From the day of his enthronement to his death, he always wore his white Cistercian habit under his papal robes. He was also a confirmed Anglophile. He once told John of Salisbury he thought the English were the best of all races, apart from when frivolity got the better of them. Where was I? Louis VII of France agreed to put together a task force for a number of reasons. First, he was a pious man, although some might have called him dull. Second, he thought the journey might bring a sense of seriousness to his rather flighty wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Third, he had recently been involved in some atrocious massacres, for which he wished to atone with a visit to Jerusalem. But when Louis tried to rally the troops, they showed a marked lack of enthusiasm for the whole thing. So Louis called in his master motivator. He unleashed Bernard. Bernard addressed the crowds at an assembly at Vézelay. Not for nothing was he called Dr. Honeytongue. He was magnificent, eloquent, forceful. He was wearing a palm cross that the Pope had sent him, and just by purest coincidence, he had prepared bundles of them in readiness for all the volunteers. As he spoke, people started to cry out for these crosses, and when the supply ran out, Bernard ripped his own clothes up to provide more. He talked thousands of his listeners into signing up and cheerily going to their deaths in a welter of blood and stupidity. Personally, it could have gone better for Louis. Eleanor accompanied him on the crusade, but was deeply bored by him. When they eventually reached Antioch, she hooked up with her uncle, Prince Raymond of Antioch. It was widely rumoured that she and Uncle Ray got on very well, too well. Meanwhile, a huge Turkish force was marching towards them, and the only possible support the Crusaders had were the Muslims of Damascus, whose ruler was hostile to Imad ad-Din, the Turkish leader. Only an idiot would launch an attack on the only possible allies he might have in the region. So that's what Louis did. He compounded this idiocy by failing to conquer the city, and just 5 days after the siege his forces were forced to retreat across the Syrian desert at the height of summer, attacked every step of the way by Arab archers. Thousands died of sickness, starvation, and Arab arrows. Back in Europe, Bernard, when he heard the news, far from admitting any liability, decided that it was all the fault of the Byzantines. He even suggested they should launch a crusade against Constantinople. As Peter Levi wrote, "If ever a saint spent time in purgatory, it must have been Bernard. He may be said to have invented the Christian European God of 1914.